I always thought that the last year of high school would be unforgettable, but not for the reason it turned out to be. I had imagined laughter in the hallways, group pictures in the courtyard, and late-night chats about the future. But instead, I walked those halls like a ghost. People didn't say anything cruel. They simply said nothing at all. The silence was louder than words, and it followed me from the cafeteria to the classrooms like a shadow I couldn't shake. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe I had pulled back too much and it was my fault. I replayed conversations in my head, wondering what I had done wrong. I watched as group chats I had once been in came alive without me, full of emoji hearts and inside jokes. Even teachers, though kind, seemed to look through me. It felt like I was disappearing, day by day, right in front of everyone. Then came the whispers about graduation, people talking about their dresses, caps, and plans for after the ceremony. I smiled and nodded, pretending I knew what they were talking about. I assumed my invitation was coming late, maybe lost or forgotten by accident. I kept checking my email, the mailbox, even asking the school office casually just to make sure they had the right address. But the truth was beginning to take shape, and it hurt. The confirmation came quietly. One of the girls in my math class mentioned the group photo rehearsal. I said, "What rehearsal?" She looked at me, paused, and said, "Oh, I thought you weren't invited." That moment still plays in my mind in slow motion, the way her eyes dropped, the awkward silence, the way my heart sank like a stone in deep water. It wasn't an error. It wasn't a mix-up. They had simply decided I didn't belong. I went home that day in silence. I didn't cry on the bus. I didn't scream into my pillow. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fan, feeling the weight of something unspoken pressing down on my chest, the kind of sadness that doesn't explode, but seeps in slowly. I thought about my parents. How would I even tell them? How do you explain to the people who love you that the world outside doesn't see you the same way? That night, I found myself scrolling through photos on social media, classmates posing in their gowns, laughing in parks, tagging each other in posts with captions like "Can't wait for the big day." Not one person had asked me if I was coming. Not one had noticed I wasn't in the planning group. It was like watching a movie I thought I was cast in, only to realize I wasn't even an extra. I didn't know how to process the mix of emotions, confusion, sadness, then anger. Silent anger, the kind that simmers quietly, that makes your stomach twist and your chest tighten. I wasn't looking for a spotlight or special treatment. I just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged. That day, I realized I had been erased from a chapter of my own life, and no one noticed but me. But even in that silence, something shifted. It didn't feel like strength at the time. It felt like defeat. Still, there was a small voice inside me, weak but steady, that whispered, "They may not have invited you, but this isn't the end of your story." I didn't know it yet, but that voice would become the one thing I held on to when everything else faded. After graduation passed without me, I stopped showing up for anything that felt optional. Birthdays, reunions, even casual get-togethers, I declined them all. I figured if no one had noticed me before, they wouldn't miss me now. The more I withdrew, the easier it became to believe I didn't matter. I started to blend into the background of my own life, walking through days that felt empty and heavy. The silence from others became the silence within me. I stopped expecting calls, stopped waiting for messages. I built walls around myself, quietly, brick by brick. College had always been part of the plan, but now it felt distant, almost unreachable. My parents did their best, but money was tight, and I couldn't afford to aim too high. I filled out application forms at night, after helping with chores or babysitting my cousin. Each rejection hit harder than the last. The acceptance I finally received was to a local community college, not glamorous, but mine. I tried to be proud, but mostly I felt like I was settling. It wasn't the dream I had imagined, but it was a beginning, and I didn't have the luxury of being picky. The first semester was brutal. I commuted over an hour by bus every morning, often in the dark. My backpack felt like it weighed more than I did. I worked at a grocery store on weekends and cleaned offices at night. I ate cold sandwiches in break rooms and studied between shifts. Sometimes I slept only 2 or 3 hours. My body ached constantly, but I pushed through, fueled by coffee, willpower, and this quiet, burning need to prove I deserved a place in the world, if no one had given it to me. I remember sitting in the back of classrooms, afraid to speak up, The professors were kind, but I felt worlds apart from the other students. They talked about internships, connections, study groups. I didn't have time for any of that. Every minute I wasn't in class, I was working or commuting. I watched others bond over shared experiences, while I moved silently from one obligation to the next. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down, I feared I was falling further behind with every passing day. At night, I would return home to a quiet room, peel off my shoes, and collapse onto the mattress. Sometimes I cried without knowing why. Other times, I was too tired to feel anything at all. The routine was exhausting, but strangely comforting. It kept my mind busy and my heart numb. I wasn't living, exactly. I was surviving. There's a difference. Surviving meant constantly doing, constantly hustling, just to stay afloat. There was no room for reflection, no time for grief. There were moments, small ones, when I felt something stir, an encouraging comment from a professor, a good grade on a paper, a stranger who smiled at me on the bus. They didn't fix anything, but they reminded me I wasn't invisible to everyone. Still, it was hard to hold on to hope when every day felt like climbing a staircase that never ended. My muscles burned, my feet blistered, but I kept climbing, because stopping meant sinking, and I had sunk enough already. I often wondered if the people who left me out even remembered me. Did they know I was still trying, still fighting, still showing up for a life that barely seemed to notice me? Probably not. But in some ways, their absence had become my motivation. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I was chasing something else, dignity, maybe, or the feeling of finally belonging somewhere, anywhere. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to matter. Even now, I don't know how I made it through those years. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have clarity or confidence. What I had was grit, the stubborn refusal to give up, even when no one was watching. Those invisible years didn't break me. They carved me into someone I hadn't met yet, someone stronger, quieter, and far more resilient than the girl they forgot to invite. I used to write letters late at night, when everything felt too heavy to carry in silence. I never intended to send them. They were my way of screaming without making a sound, of saying what I couldn't say out loud. Some were typed into my notes app, others scribbled on old receipts or the backs of class schedules. I kept them in a box under my bed, my collection of unsent truths. Each one started with a name, and each one ended in a way I never got to live. There was one for Emily, the girl who used to sit next to me in homeroom. I don't know what I did wrong, I wrote, but the way you stopped talking to me felt like I was being erased, piece by piece. I poured my confusion into that letter, trying to understand how someone could laugh with you on a Monday and look through you by Friday. I never blamed her completely. I just wanted her to see that I noticed, that I cared, that I missed what we had. Then there was the letter to Mr. Daniels, my English teacher. He once told me I had a voice worth hearing, but I never believed him. I wish I had thanked you, I wrote, for seeing something in me when I barely saw anything in myself. I imagined handing him the letter after class one day, watching his face as he read it, but I never did. I was too afraid that even he had forgotten who I was, like everyone else had. Some of the hardest letters were to people who never meant to hurt me, like my parents. I'm sorry, I pretend everything's fine, I wrote in one of them. I just don't want you to worry, but I'm tired. I'm so tired. That letter broke me. Writing it made me feel like I was admitting defeat, like I was letting them down. So I never showed it. I tucked it away, ashamed of my weakness, pretending I was stronger than I was. There was one letter I rewrote at least 20 times. It started with to the ones who didn't invite me. In it, I told them how much that moment shattered me, how it made me question my worth, how it left a scar I couldn't explain. I didn't ask for apologies. I just wanted them to know I had feelings too. That being left out didn't make me disappear, it made me quieter, but not smaller. It made me cautious, but not broken. Writing these letters became a kind of ritual. Each one gave shape to my pain. It felt safer to put it on paper than to risk being ignored again in real life. These were conversations I never had, moments of vulnerability I kept to myself. The letters weren't about revenge. They were about recognition, about being seen, even if only by me. They reminded me that I still had something to say, even when no one was listening. Sometimes, I imagined sending them all at once, mailing them anonymously, or leaving them on desks like secret confessions. I pictured the surprise on people's faces, the maybe regret in their eyes. But deep down, I knew the letters weren't really for them. They were for the girl who wrote them, the one who was still holding on, the one who needed to feel heard, if only in her own handwriting. I never sent any of those letters, but I never threw them away either. They are still with me, folded and faded, like quiet witnesses to a version of me that existed in the shadows. Maybe someday I'll open that box again. Maybe I won't, but knowing they exist is enough. Because they remind me that even in silence, I was never truly voiceless. I just needed time to find the courage to speak. It started with a paper I almost didn't turn in. It was from my writing class, a short essay about resilience. I had written it at 2 a.m., after my shift, barely awake, unsure if the words made sense. I handed it in anyway, expecting nothing. A week later, my professor, Dr. Hayes, stopped me after class. She held the paper in her hand, circled with notes and underlined phrases. "This," she said, tapping her finger on the last paragraph, "is powerful. Have you ever thought about doing something with your voice?" I stared at her, confused. No one had ever said that to me, not in those words. I shrugged and muttered something about just trying to pass. She smiled softly, not pushing, but not letting it go either. "You see things clearly," she added. "The world needs that." I walked out of the classroom clutching the paper, like it was proof of something I hadn't dared believe, that maybe I wasn't invisible after all. Maybe someone saw me not for who I had been, but for who I could be. A few weeks later, she emailed me about a communications internship at a local nonprofit. "It's unpaid, but it's real experience," she wrote. "I thought of you immediately." I hesitated. Between classes, work, and exhaustion, I didn't know how I'd make it fit, but something about her belief in me made it impossible to ignore, so I applied. I interviewed with shaking hands and a voice I barely recognized as mine, and I got it. My first real opportunity, my first yes. The first day at the internship felt like stepping into a world I wasn't sure I deserved to be in. Everyone was confident, fast-talking, dressed like they belonged. I kept my head down and took notes obsessively, afraid to speak up. But I listened, I learned. I stayed late to help organize files no one else wanted to touch. Slowly, I started to understand the rhythm of the place, and one day, someone asked for my opinion during a meeting and I gave it. They nodded, they listened. I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I felt capable. I wasn't the smartest in the room, but I worked harder than anyone else. I took on extra projects, asked questions, and showed up even when I was exhausted. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was growing. Every task completed, every small win, built something new in me. A foundation of self-worth that hadn't been there before. I started walking differently, standing straighter, speaking louder. There was a moment, small, but unforgettable. My supervisor pulled me aside and said, "You're sharp, you have instincts, you're going to go far if you keep this up." I smiled, but inside I wanted to cry, not out of sadness, but relief. After years of doubt and silence, someone was telling me I had potential, not as a favor, not out of pity, but because it was true. It felt like someone had unlocked a door I'd been pushing on for years. That internship didn't change my life overnight, but it changed the way I saw myself. I started applying for things I never would have considered before: leadership roles, writing competitions, workshops. I didn't always win, but I stopped assuming I'd fail. I began to believe that effort might actually lead somewhere, that maybe I had more to offer than I thought. The fear was still there, but now it had company: hope. Looking back, I think of that moment with Dr. Hayes as the beginning of everything. Not the paper, not the internship, but the sentence, "The world needs that." It echoed in me, louder than any insult, stronger than any silence I'd faced. For the first time, someone saw a light in me, and instead of hiding from it, I stepped closer. That was the shift at the opportunity, but the decision to stop doubting my place in the room, to start showing up like I belonged. I didn't mean for it to happen. The article started as a class assignment: write about something that matters to you. I almost wrote about time management or study tips. But then I remembered the girl I used to be, the one left out, the one who watched everyone else move forward while she stood still. So I wrote that story. I didn't name names, I just wrote the truth, the loneliness, the silence, the slow rebuild of self-worth. I titled it, "The Girl They Forgot." I submitted it and didn't think much more of it. But within days, everything changed. My professor asked if she could share the article on the college blog. I agreed, thinking only a few people would read it. But then someone shared it. And someone else. Within a week, I was getting emails from stranger students, adults, even teachers saying how much it resonated with them. Some had been left out too. Some had done the leaving and regretted it. People were crying, thanking me, sharing their own stories. My inbox became a place of connection, not silence. It was overwhelming and beautiful. For the first time, I realized the power of my words. Not just for me, but for others. I had always thought my pain was something to hide, something that made me weak, but now I saw it differently. Pain shared with honesty became something else, something that opened doors, bridged gaps, healed invisible wounds. I wasn't just writing to process anymore. I was writing to reach, and people were reaching back. That changed everything. A student group invited me to speak at their event, a panel on belonging and resilience. I almost said no. The thought of standing in front of a room, speaking my truth out loud, made my stomach twist. But something in me whispered, say yes. So I did. I practiced alone in my room for hours, rewriting my speech a dozen times. My hands shook as I stepped up to the microphone. But when I started speaking, the words came easier than I expected. Because they were mine, because they were real. After the event, someone came up to me and said, "You said everything I've been trying to say for years." That moment stayed with me, not because of the compliment, but because I knew what it felt like to have no words for what you feel. And now, I was helping give those feelings a voice. I started to wonder, what if this was what I was meant to do? Not just write, but speak, share, help others find the language for their own pain and strength. Little by little, I began crafting a new identity. I was no longer just the girl who had been left out. I was becoming a communicator, a storyteller, a builder of bridges between silence and understanding. I joined the student newspaper, submitted opinion pieces, and accepted more speaking invitations. It was still terrifying sometimes, but the fear came with excitement now, and with purpose. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen. I was heard. That my family started to notice the change, too. I smiled more. I spoke with confidence. My parents didn't understand all the details of what I was doing, but they saw something growing in me, something alive. I remember my mom saying, "You look like you know who you are now." And for the first time in a long time, I did. I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone anymore. I was becoming someone I could be proud of. Finding my voice didn't happen in one moment. It happened in pieces through every word I wrote, every fear I faced, every person who said, "Me too." And with every piece, I stitched together a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and more open than the one who had once sat alone, unnoticed. My voice had always been there. I just needed to trust it. And once I did, there was no turning back. I still remember the sound of names being called, one after another, echoing through the auditorium like a drumbeat of recognition. Applause followed each name, sometimes loud and wild, sometimes polite and brief. I sat in the back row of the audience, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, pretending I had just come to support a friend. But the truth was, I came to prove to myself that I could handle it, that hearing all their names and not mine wouldn't break me. I was wrong. It did. As each familiar face walked across the stage, I felt myself shrinking. I saw the same people who had once shared classes with me, who had laughed in hallways and planned a ceremony that I wasn't part of. My heart pounded with every name, wondering what it would feel like to hear mine announced, to walk across that stage, to be acknowledged. But my name never came, not because of a mistake but because I had never been invited in the first place. I kept my face still, held my breath, and told myself over and over, "You don't need this. You're doing fine without it." But part of me still ached for that moment, just a second of being seen, celebrated, called forward. I imagined how it would have felt to wear the gown, to hear someone clap for me. But all I heard that day was the applause for others and the silence I carried like a stone in my chest. I left before the ceremony ended. In the days that followed, the pictures flooded social media, caps in the air, big group hugs, glittery signs. I avoided them at first, scrolling past quickly, pretending they didn't bother me. But deep down, I was grieving something I'd never had. Not just the ceremony, but the belonging, the community. That sense of closure everyone else seemed to get. while I was left behind with unanswered questions and a heart full of quiet hurt. And yet, despite all that, I was building something. While they were celebrating, I was working. I was learning how to manage a communications project, how to edit articles, how to speak into a microphone without shaking. I had started writing with purpose, connecting with people who cared about what I had to say. No, there wasn't a diploma in a shiny folder yet, but there was progress. There was momentum. There was growth. And it was all mine. No one clapped. When I pulled my first all-nighter to meet a deadline, no one handed me a medal for showing up to work after a 3-hour commute. But every time I didn't give up, I earned something stronger than applause. I earned belief in myself. And that belief became the foundation for everything I would go on to build. The absence of my name from that list didn't erase my journey. It made it more real, more mine. Sometimes I think about printing my own name, saying it out loud, clapping for myself in an empty room just to give that moment back to the girl who never got it, because she deserved it. She showed up every day when no one asked her to. She worked when no one was watching. She created a path where there was none. And even if no one called her name, she kept going. That deserves more than a diploma. It deserves respect. I didn't walk across that stage, and maybe I never will. But I've crossed other stages, small ones, quiet ones, but meaningful. And the truth is, not being on their list forced me to write my own. A list of goals, values, victories. A list where my name is at the top, bold and underlined. Not because someone put it there, but because I did. And no one can take that away from me. It started with a single post. I wrote about what it felt like to be invisible, to walk through life unnoticed, to crave acknowledgement without knowing how to ask for it. I didn't expect much. I just wanted to put the feeling somewhere outside my body. I published it on a free blog, gave it a simple name, The Unseen Space. I wasn't trying to build a platform. I just needed a place to speak freely, for myself, and maybe for someone else who felt the same. I shared the link quietly, without fanfare, and then something surprising happened. People read it. Messages started to come in slowly at first. One student wrote, "I thought I was the only one." Another said, "Your words helped me get through this week." I was stunned. I had written those posts alone, unsure if anyone would even care, but they did. Every message was a reminder that my pain hadn't been for nothing. If it could help someone else feel less alone, then maybe it had a purpose. Maybe I had a purpose. And so, I kept writing weekly posts, reflections, letters to my younger self. Soon, I realized I wasn't just sharing my story, I was creating a space where others could share theirs too. I opened up submissions, created prompts, invited people to send in their own letters, poems, memories. I moderated every comment, replied to every message. It became a little online sanctuary for the quiet ones, the overlooked, the ones still finding their voice. I wasn't just healing, I was helping others heal too. And that gave my journey new meaning. Eventually, someone from the college's student affairs department reached out. They had seen the blog and wanted me to speak at a mental health awareness event. I froze. Me, again. But I said yes. By now, I knew fear was part of the process. I stood on stage with trembling hands, reading aloud the words I had once whispered to an empty screen. And when I finished, people stood. Some clapped, some cried, a few even hugged me afterward. I walked off that stage changed. From there, doors began opening. A local nonprofit offered me a small grant to expand the blog into a community storytelling project. I built a team, just a few volunteers at first, all of us bonded by similar scars. We created writing workshops, safe spaces online, even partnered with schools. What began as a survival outlet became a movement, and I was at the heart of it. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had lived the questions. I received a scholarship to attend a summer leadership institute, fully funded. The letter said, "We believe in the power of your story." I held that paper and cried in the quiet of my room. It wasn't about the money. It was about being recognized, validated. Later that year, I was nominated for a Youth Impact Award. Standing on that stage, I thought about the girl who once wasn't on any list. Now, I was being called up not because I fit in, but because I stood out. Recognition didn't fix everything. I still had hard days, still battled doubt. But now I had proof that my voice could make a difference. That telling the truth could open doors. That helping others heal could be just as powerful as healing yourself. I wasn't chasing applause. I was building something that could outlast it. A community, a legacy, a reason to keep going, even when it was hard. And for the first time, I felt grounded in my purpose. I didn't just want to succeed for myself anymore. I wanted to create space for others to rise too. For every young person who felt overlooked, left out, forgotten, I wanted to say, you matter, you're not alone, and maybe, just maybe, help them believe it. I wasn't the girl left off the list anymore. I was the woman writing new ones that included everyone who had ever been made to feel small, and that, to me, was the greatest victory of all. The email came on an ordinary Tuesday, sandwiched between a newsletter and a spam message. I almost deleted it without reading. The subject line read, Commencement Speaker Invitation Class of 20XX. I stared at it for a long time, assuming it was a mistake. But as I opened it, my breath caught. It was real. My old college wanted me to return not just to attend graduation, but to stand on their stage and give the speech. The same school that had once forgotten me now wanted me front and center. My first reaction wasn't pride, it was panic. I closed my laptop and walked away, heart racing. All the memories rushed back, sitting at the back of the auditorium, not hearing my name called, watching everyone celebrate while I pretended not to care. The thought of returning to that place, even now, stirred something raw in me. I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Part of me still carried that wound, and opening it again felt too risky. I left the email unanswered for days. Every time I thought about responding, something inside me recoiled. What if I stood there and no one clapped? What if I opened my mouth and the old version of me, the unsure, invisible one, came back? I told myself I was too busy, that I had other commitments. But deep down, I knew it was fear. Not of failure, but of being seen too late. Of being noticed now, when it no longer hurt them, but still hurt me. But then, I thought about the girl who sat in silence while others walked across the stage. The one who wrote letters she never sent, worked shifts no one saw, and built something from nothing. I thought about her courage, the quiet kind that never got applause. And I realized something. Maybe this wasn't just about me. Maybe this was for every person who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Maybe it was time to stand up, not for attention, but for truth. So I said yes. But I made myself a promise. I wouldn't speak just to impress. I wouldn't tell a sanitized story of success. I would tell the whole truth about being forgotten, overlooked, and underestimated. About finding strength not in being chosen, but in choosing myself. I spent weeks crafting the speech, writing and rewriting until it sounded like me, not the polished version others expected, but the real one. I didn't want to inspire with perfection. I wanted to connect through honesty. The day of the ceremony, I stood behind the curtain, palms sweating, heart pounding. I could hear the crowd, the familiar echo of names being called. I took a deep breath and thought, this time, you're not watching from the audience, you're walking onto the stage. My name was on the program. People were clapping before I said a word. It felt surreal, like I had stepped into a parallel world one I had once only dreamed about. When I began to speak, the room fell silent. I told them about my journey, the nights no one saw, the pain no one acknowledged, the years of invisible effort. I told them how I wasn't invited to my own graduation. I told them how that silence shaped me. And then I told them how I found my voice and used it, not to get revenge, but to build something meaningful. I looked out at the sea of faces, many I didn't recognize, and said, if no one ever called your name, call your own. By the time I finished, the applause was overwhelming. People stood, some wiped away tears, but the loudest sound, to me, was internal. It was the voice inside me whispering, you did it. Not for them, for you. I walked off that stage different, not because they finally saw me, but because I had shown up as myself, fully, fearlessly, and that made all the difference. Returning to campus felt surreal, like stepping into a memory both familiar and distant. The buildings stood the same, but everything else had changed, myself most of all. As I walked through the quad, I could feel eyes on me, some curious, others indifferent. I spotted faces I recognized, but many looked right through me, as if I was a ghost from a forgotten past. I was no longer invisible, yet somehow I felt like I was fading into the background again, caught between who I was and who I had become. I made my way to the old English building first, hoping to find Dr. Hayes. When I saw her, my heart caught her warm smile was the one familiar beacon in the crowd. She hugged me tightly, like I was the missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't realized was incomplete. But as I mingled with other professors, the welcome grew colder. Some nodded politely, their eyes flickering with vague recognition, or none at all. It was clear that for many, I was just another alum passing through, not the girl who had once sat quietly in the back of their classrooms. The students were different. Now new faces, new energy. I overheard whispered questions. Is she really the speaker? Didn't she used to be invisible? The words stung, but I swallowed the discomfort. I knew that part of me was still a stranger here, even as I stood at the center of attention. Walking these halls again was like peeling back layers of time, each step revealing old wounds and fresh scars. I realized I was carrying more than memories. I was carrying the weight of every glance that had passed me by. Conversations with former classmates were awkward. Some smiled hesitantly, trying to be polite, while others acted as if they had never known me. A few tried to make small talk, but I caught the hesitation beneath their words. I wondered if they remembered how I had been left out, or if my absence from their lives had erased me completely. The silence between us felt louder than any words, a reminder that not all bridges were meant to be crossed easily. Despite the tension, there were moments of unexpected connection. I ran into a few people who reached out, genuinely old friends who had quietly supported me in the past, and new acquaintances who admired the work I'd done. Their smiles were like lifelines, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this room full of strangers. Those small moments of warmth gave me strength to keep walking, to keep reclaiming the space I had once been denied. Emotionally, it was exhausting. I found myself battling between pride and pain, proud of how far I'd come, but haunted by the memories of rejection. Every laugh I heard felt like a reminder of what I had missed. Every applause for someone else, a quiet echo of my own silence. Yet, in this tension, I found a strange clarity. The past hadn't defined me. It had shaped me, and returning here wasn't about reclaiming a lost place. It was about owning a new one. At the end of the day, I stood in the empty auditorium, the same stage where I would speak tomorrow. The lights were dimmed, but the seats held the ghosts of the past, whispers of laughter, moments of exclusion. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. I wasn't the same girl who had left years ago. I was stronger, louder, and ready to turn the page and write a new chapter, one where I controlled the narrative. Leaving the campus that evening, I looked back one last time. The building lights flickered against the darkening sky like stars, distant but steady. I realized then that coming back wasn't just a physical return. It was a reckoning, a confrontation, a healing. And as much as it scared me, I knew it was necessary. Because sometimes, to move forward, you have to go back. And this time, I was coming back not as a forgotten girl, but as a woman who belonged. Standing at the podium, the bright lights hit me like a wave, blinding but electric. The crowd stretched out before me, faces expectant, some familiar, most strangers. My heart pounded, a fierce rhythm echoing years of silence and struggle. I gripped the edges of the lectern, reminding myself that this moment was mine, not theirs. I cleared my throat and began, my voice steady despite the tremors inside. I wasn't supposed to be here, I said, and a hush fell. Because, years ago, my name wasn't on the list. I told them about that day, how I sat in the audience, invisible, while classmates walked across the stage, how I wasn't invited to my own graduation, left out like a forgotten chapter. The pain wasn't just in the moment, it was in the years after, the years of fighting to be seen. I shared the nights of exhaustion, the battles with doubt, and the letters I never sent. The room was silent, heavy with shared understanding. I wasn't just speaking for myself, I was speaking for everyone who had ever felt unseen. But I didn't dwell in the darkness. I spoke about the shifter professor who believed in me, the internship that changed everything, and the blog that became a sanctuary. I told them about finding my voice, about choosing to speak even when it was terrifying. I talked about building something bigger than myself, about transforming pain into purpose. The words flowed, raw and real, a testimony to resilience and hope. I saw faces soften, eyes glisten, hearts open. This wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. I reminded them that everyone's journey is different, that setbacks don't define us unless we let them. There will be moments when you feel invisible, I said, when the world forgets your name. But those moments don't have to break you, they can make you stronger. My voice grew louder, more confident. I wasn't the timid girl hiding in the back anymore. I was a woman claiming her story, her space, her power. The energy in the room shifted, electric and alive. I spoke of the power in vulnerability, the courage to admit pain, to ask for help, to stand up after falling. I urged them to find their own voices, to lift others as they rise. No one gets to decide your worth but you, I told them, and no one can take your story away. The applause started softly, then grew louder, until it filled the room. Like thunder, I felt the weight of every past silence lift, replaced by a chorus of support and acknowledgement. When I finished, the room erupted into a standing ovation. People rose to their feet, clapping, some wiping tears away. I looked out and saw faces lit with hope, pride, and gratitude. It wasn't about being the center of attention, it was about connection. About proving that even the quietest voices can fill a room when they're finally heard. I smiled through the tears that welled up, knowing this moment belonged to everyone who had ever been left out. Walking off the stage, I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. The applause echoed behind me, a soundtrack to a new beginning. I knew this was more than just a speech, it was a declaration. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had finally, unapologetically, claimed my place in the world. No longer invisible, no longer forgotten. That night, as I lay in bed, the echoes of the ovation still ringing in my ears, I realized something profound. The story I once thought would break me had become the story that saved me. And maybe, just maybe, it would save others too. After the speech, a few faces from my past found their way to me. Some I hadn't expected, others I had hoped would never show up. They spoke softly at first, almost afraid to break the fragile peace that had settled between us. "I'm sorry," they said, words I'd longed to hear but never truly believed would come. I nodded, listening carefully, letting their apologies wash over me like waves against a shore. It wasn't the closure I needed, but it was something, a small step in a long journey. Some apologized for the obvious, the exclusion, the silence, the years I spent invisible in plain sight. Others apologized for things they never fully understood themselves. The missed friendship, the lack of support, the moments when they looked away. Their words were sincere, tinged with regret, and a hint of vulnerability I hadn't seen before. I saw in their eyes what I had felt inside for so long, a shared humanity, imperfect and aching to be acknowledged. But as I listened, I realized I wasn't waiting for these apologies to heal me anymore. I had built my strength on a foundation far deeper than their words. Their regrets didn't erase my pain, nor did they rewrite my past. What mattered was the path I chose now, the freedom to accept, forgive, or simply walk away without bitterness. I understood that their apologies were a gift, not a requirement, and that I was no longer bound by their mistakes. Some conversations were brief, almost tentative, as if we were all feeling out new ground. Others were longer, filled with memories and confessions that had been locked away for years. I shared a few stories too carefully, cautiously knowing that vulnerability is a two-way street. For the first time, I saw people not as enemies or strangers, but as flawed individuals trying to make sense of their own regrets. That shift in perspective was quietly freeing. There were moments when old wounds threatened to surface, when their words reopened the places I thought had healed. But I met those moments with a new strength. Instead of retreating into silence, I spoke my truth calmly, setting boundaries when needed. I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over pain. And sometimes, peace means moving forward without looking back. In the days after, I found myself reflecting more and more on what it means to truly let go. I wasn't the same girl who needed validation from others to feel worthy. I was a woman who had found her own voice, her own power. The apologies were important not because they changed what happened, but because they reminded me that people can grow too, and growth, even when late, deserves space. I no longer needed anyone to apologize to keep walking. My journey wasn't dependent on their regrets or acknowledgments. It was fueled by my own resilience, my own dreams, and my own self-worth. That realization felt like a weight lifting, a door opening wide. I could finally breathe fully, live freely, and write the next chapters of my life without the shadows of the past trailing behind me. Standing there, amidst the tentative reconciliations and quiet apologies, I felt a deep sense of liberation. The past was a part of me, but it didn't have to define me. I was whole, imperfect, and moving forward, not because they said sorry, but because I chose to rise above. And that was the greatest freedom of all. Years have passed since that unforgettable day when I stood at the podium, my voice carrying the weight of every silent moment before it. Life has taken me places I once only dreamed of, places built, not on chance, but on relentless determination and quiet courage. I've grown into a woman who doesn't just survive but thrives, who understands that pain can be a foundation, not a prison. The girl who was left out of her own graduation is now someone who creates spaces where others feel seen and heard. I've built a career around communication, storytelling, and empowerment. My work touches lives in ways I never imagined. What started as a simple blog has become a community, a platform for voices long ignored to finally rise. I speak at events, mentor young people, and continue to write, always pushing to break down walls of silence and invisibility. It's humbling and exhilarating, knowing that my story has the power to spark change. Sometimes I think about that girl sitting in the back row, her heart heavy with exclusion. I wonder if she ever dreamed of this, of being a leader, a voice, an inspiration. I hope she did, because every moment of pain, every tear shed in quiet rooms, every letter never sent, it all led to this. To the woman who learned to stand tall, not despite her past, but because of it. I carry her with me, a reminder of how far I've come. Still remember the moment when the invitation came, the one to speak at that graduation. At first, I was afraid to return. I thought going back would reopen old wounds, but I took that step, not for them, but for me. And standing on that stage changed everything. I wasn't the girl they forgot. I was the woman they chose to hear. That choice transformed my story from one of silence to one of power. Now, when I look back, I see how every rejection was a redirection, every closed door an invitation to build my own path. I don't need anyone else's approval anymore. I've learned that true validation comes from within, from showing up for myself, from embracing every part of my journey. I am no longer waiting for an invitation. Today, I'm the one who sends them, the one who opens doors for others, who shines a light on the invisible. Life hasn't been perfect. There have been challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but those moments no longer define me. They are chapters in a story of resilience, growth, and transformation. I've learned to welcome uncertainty as part of the journey, to trust in my strengths even when the path isn't clear. And with each step forward, I rewrite the narrative, not as a victim, but as a victor. The last time I spoke at that auditorium, I walked off the stage with a heart full of pride and peace. The applause behind me was loud, but it was the quiet confidence inside that mattered most. I knew then that I was never the same again, not because I had changed who I was, but because I had embraced who I truly am, a woman who turned exclusion into empowerment, silence into voice, and pain into purpose. As I step away from the spotlight now, the world feels different, full of possibilities, connections, and hope. The stage is no longer a place of fear, but a place of belonging. And with every confident step I take, I carry with me the truth that once, I wasn't invited to the celebration, but today, I'm the one who invites others in. And that is the greatest victory of all.